Good afternoon. My name is Tim Wilson. I'm a fisheries biologist with the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission. My presentation today is on the status of fish populations in Pymatuning Reservoir. Let's get started. Pymatuning Reservoir was built in 1933 to supply cooling water to the heavy industry in Sharon. The lake encompasses about 14,000 acres and straddles the Pennsylvania and Ohio state line. Both states, Pennsylvania and Ohio, maintain a Pymatuning State Park, and the adjoining Sanctuary Lake adds an additional 2,500 acres. The sanctuary is closed to all public access. It is owned by the Pennsylvania Game Commission, and they use it for waterfowl production. It is also the location of our Linesville State Fish Hatchery, and the Sanctuary Lake contains most of our warm water brood for the state. The maximum depth of Pymatuning Reservoir is about 30 feet down near the dam. The lake is bisected by a causeway, and north of the causeway, the maximum depth is about 18 feet. During summer, the lake does thermally stratify in mid to late summer, which means that the bottom or hypolimnion will eventually go anoxic, and this will dictate the location and activity of the fish in mid to late summer, and anglers should take that into account. The lake is jointly managed by the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission and the Ohio Division of Wildlife, and all management decisions have to be approved by both states before any regulation can take effect. Pymatuning Lake maintains outstanding fisheries, most of which are maintained through natural reproduction, including largemouth and smallmouth bass, channel catfish, black and white crappies, yellow perch, sunfish, brown and yellow bullheads, and white bass. Two of the main fisheries in Pymatuning, though, are stocked. The lake is stocked with walleye fingerlings at a rate of about 40 per acre, half of which are contributed each by Pennsylvania and Ohio. In addition to that, Pennsylvania stocks 4 million fry annually. Occasionally, one or both states will have surplus fingerlings, which were also stocked in Pymatuning Reservoir. Fingerling stocking only began in 2008. Prior to that, the walleye population was maintained through walleye fry stocking, but changes in the forage base and the predator base reduced the survival of our walleye fry, forcing us to switch to fingerlings. The other stocked fishery that anglers are familiar with are the muskellunge. We've made recent changes to our muskellunge program in 2018. We switched from a fall fingerling to a much larger and more robust spring yearling. These fish survive much better, so we now stock those at a rate of 0.75 yearlings per acre and only in even numbered years. So it was stocked with 10,450 yearlings in 2018 and in 2020. The reason for these outstanding fish populations in Pymatuning Reservoir is its very diverse and very dense forage base. The top three species being gizzard shad, alewives, and spot-tail shiners. In addition to these, there are also spot-fin shiners, brook silversides, golden shiners, blunt-nosed minnows, and banded killifish. You can see in the pictures to the right, the top picture is 3-year classes of alewives, and the bottom picture has a golden shiner, a yellow perch, a spot-tail shiner, and 1 alewife and 1 gizzard shad. In addition to these forage species, the juvenile panfish of the lake also are popular forage for our sport fish, including small yellow perch, small crappies, and small bluegills. Less significant but also present are juvenile white suckers and red horse suckers, common carp, and quillback. The numbers I will present today are based upon the fish sampling performed by my office. Each spring we perform a trap net survey targeting mostly walleye and muskellunge. We also perform an annual fall night electrofishing survey to index the survival of our stocked walleyes, and we collect walleye young of the year. About every 3rd year, we perform spring night electrofishing to index our bass populations. In addition to our fish sampling, we also perform temperature and dissolved oxygen profiles, basic water quality measurements. We occasionally perform shoreline seining to index young of the year fish that aren't caught by other equipment. And recently we've been assisting DCNR with aquatic vegetation assessments, which has become a big deal in recent years. So let's start with the abundance of fish in the lake. Here is the top three forage species that we talked about: gizzard shad, spot tail, shiners, and alewives. The big takeaway here is to notice that prior to 2000, we rarely saw an alewife in Pymatuning Lake, and something changed and they began to emerge and grow in density to eventually peaking in 2013. But the emergence of the alewife had cascading effects, not through just the forage fish, but also through the predatory fish. And remember that time frame, the early 2000s, when alewives arrived, because we'll talk about that when we talk about other species. Walleyes are probably the most popular fish with anglers in Pymatuning Reservoir. This graph represents their population trends through time since 1989. A lot of the old timers considered the walleye heyday back in the 90s, but if you can see from recent trap net results, the heyday is right now. Not only has the abundance of walleye changed, but many of the key characteristics of the population have changed. They grow faster, they live longer, and their average size has increased from 14 inches to around 18 or 19 inches these days. And the thing for anglers to remember is the tactics that catch 14 and 15-inch walleyes are not necessarily the best tactics to catch 18 and 20-inch walleyes. They utilize different parts of the forage base, and often they school by size. So if what you're doing is catching small walleyes or not catching walleyes at all, change your tactics. Go to a bigger bait, a faster moving bait, and change location. But right now, like I said, the heyday for walleye fishing is right now. Well, how did we get here with walleyes? As I've stated, for years we stocked walleye fry, and walleye fry produced outstanding populations. However, with the emergence of alewives in the early 2000s, alewives again are a known predator of walleye fry, which really reduced the survival of our stocked fish. Beginning in 2008, we switched to stocking fingerlings, and in addition to the stocking of fingerlings and the changes in the forage base, we are now getting excellent returns on our walleye stocked fingerlings. And the high point is, if you notice, 2019 and 2020, we have two outstanding year classes entering the fishery, which means in 2021 there are a lot of 8 to 14-inch fish in the system, but in the future those fish will mature to legal size, and walleye fishing should be really good for the next several years. While these fish are sublegal, if you catch them, please release them gently. They're the future of our fisheries. Our other fishery maintained through stocking is the Muskellunge fishery. If you have been fishing for muskellunge in Pymatuning for many years, you'll probably recall the collapse of the population back in the late 80s and early 90s due to the introduction of red spot disease. Since then, we have improved our fingerling stocking and now our yearling stocking, and you can see that the population has rebounded through the 90s and 2000s and has kind of hit a peak. We expect the stocked yearlings to continue to improve the fishery, and so we expect the muskellunge fishery to improve in both quantity and quality through time. Perhaps the second most popular fishery in Pymatuning Reservoir is for black and white crappies. You can see through their population trends through time that again may or may not be related to the emergence of the alewives, but prior to 2000 we know that crappies were a prime forage for the walleyes and the bass. Once they started shifting to alewives as a forage, the crappies saw a release from predation and have increased in abundance and quality through time. At that point, we noticed a very high angler use and angler harvest of crappies, and so in 2017 we instituted panfish enhancement regulations for crappies. So crappies in Pymatuning are now regulated with a 20-fish creel limit, all of which must be over 9 inches in minimum size. This has not, it's too early to tell if this has produced positive results, but we know the anglers are very receptive to the new regulation, and crappies remain a very popular fishery in Pymatuning. Again, very similar with the yellow perch. The emergence of the alewives and the shift in predation released the yellow perch, and they have gradually increased in density. The increase in quality is a little bit slower to happen. Anglers are harvesting a large number of yellow perch, but the population is as good now as it's ever been. And they've become a very popular fishery now, where 30 years ago they were almost unheard of. We see with bluegills perhaps a slightly different trend in abundance over time. Prior to 2000, they were quite abundant with good quality, and then they went through a rather long period of poor quality and poor abundance. But then again, perhaps a change in forage or a change in predation resulted in a rather large increase in abundance and quality of bluegills, and they are again a very abundant and good quality fishery available to anglers. They are probably not as popular as the yellow perch and the crappies, but they are a good target if you're looking to take some fish home deep, because there are plenty of quality size fish available. Bass have changed dramatically over time. When Fisheries Management Area 1, which manages the lake, was created in 1989, the bass population was dominated by smallmouth bass and had a rather small component of largemouth bass. Again, a shift through time. We see a dramatic increases in the abundance of largemouth bass, where the smallmouth have kind of stayed steady and are now much lower in density. It is a very popular bass lake. Pymatuning Lake is the only lake open to bass fishing tournaments during the traditional catch and release season. And so it sees a high use for anglers for bass, especially in the spring. Channel catfish is another emerging fishery. The Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission has not stocked channel catfish in Pymatuning Reservoir since 1995. But again, some type of change in the early 2000s produced changes in the channel catfish population, and they continued to expand through natural reproduction, peaking in 2013. Right now they're on a slightly downward trend in abundance. The thing to note about channel catfish is that they are very slow growing and very long lived in Pymatuning. On average, a 12-inch fish is going to be 5 years old, and a 15 and 16-inch fish is going to be 8 or 9 years old. So they're very slow growing and long lived, and they are growing in popularity. We now have catfish tournaments on Pymatuning Reservoir, and they're a nice addition to the fishery. Most everybody is familiar with the Pymatuning spillway, where the ducks walk on the fish and people throw bread to the carp. Things have changed for carp over the last 5 years, starting with 2017. The arrival of a koi herpes virus killed a substantial portion of the carp in the lake. And then a second virus showed up in 2019, carp edema virus, and that killed even more carp. This reduced the overall density of carp in Pymatuning, which also resulted in faster growth and larger average size. So if you go to the Pymatuning spillway now to feed the carp, it will look somewhat different than what you see in this picture. This picture was before the mortality events, and you can see a lot of small carp. Now there are fewer carp, but they are much, much bigger, and there are still a lot of them there, but not quite in the density you see in this picture. Habitat improvement. A joint effort between the Pymatuning Lake Association, the Fish and Boat Commission, and the Ohio Division of Wildlife has resulted in the placement of hundreds of fish concentrating structures throughout the lake over the last 25 or 30 years. This map is available on the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission website under Habitat Maps, and it gives the type of structure, the year it was placed, and the latitude and longitude of those structures so that you can find them. They are really good fish holding structures, especially in mid to late summer. In addition to these fish concentrating structures, this same group of organizations has done some large-scale habitat improvement, including shoreline stabilization around Snodgrass, Wilson Boat Launch, the Groot camping area, which has turned these formerly very shallow, weedy areas into deeper, really good shoreline fishing destinations. And like I said, if you need that map, it is available on the Fish and Boat Commission website. And perhaps our biggest challenge in management right now is the arrival of multiple aquatic invasive species in Pymatuning Reservoir. The two big ones right now are hydrilla, an aquatic invasive plant, and white perch, which is a fish from the Atlantic drainage and has been introduced in various parts of the state now. They are present in Lake Erie and in Kinzua Reservoir. Hydrilla, the state park has spent quite a bit of money trying to control hydrilla, and they finally have it mostly under control, but it will require constant vigilance to keep it from becoming the nuisance that it has the potential to be. It can really interfere with fishing and boating, and it is quite poor fish habitat when compared to other aquatic plants. The white perch are known predators of the eggs of some of our more popular sport fish. When they end up in reservoirs like this, they have a tendency to stunt, and so basically they become little bait stealers that are unattractive to most anglers. If you know how to identify white perch versus the native white bass, remember that there is no limit, no size limit, no creel limit on white perch, and feel free to kill all that you catch. But make sure you know how to identify them before you do that. Other species that have been introduced over the years: bowfin, alewives, which we've talked about, Chinese mystery snails. A new plant which has a very big potential to be a negative is a European frogbit. Eurasian water milfoil was the predominant plant in Pymatuning before hydrilla, and it is reemerging. If you've seen a big bushy plant in shallow water, that is another invasive called southern naiad. And in certain areas, curly leaf pondweed is also present. The introduction of these species has the potential to change the food web, the predator-prey relationships, and be real hindrances to angling and boating. So we again ask that you clean all of your gear when coming to or leaving Pymatuning Reservoir. Thank you very much for listening and watching, and we'll now go to an online discussion where I'll be able to answer your questions. Again, thank you very much.